I'm James. We're in the NetNewsLedger Studio. I'm here with Denise, with Gerald Kiesman from Restoring Balance Consulting, and Naomi Esquaga. And what we're talking about today is the kind of trauma that people have suffered, especially in some of the northern communities. Gerald, what do people need to know about trauma and how to recover from it?
Well, that's one thing I recognize. I've done over 200 workshops in Western and Central Canada, and that's one thing that I see, especially in First Nations communities, is a lack of education and awareness around post-traumatic stress disorder. So I think it's really important that people have and especially for a lot of First Nations people, where when we look at post-traumatic stress disorder, a lot of it is written by academia, by doctors, and so it becomes very difficult for people to understand that type of language. So I think it's really important is to understand post-traumatic stress disorder and learn it in more of in a layman's terms point of view, and then as well as to have the tools to help heal. And that's why I'm finding really difficult is people who want to heal, they don't have that understanding of what post-traumatic stress disorder is, so it becomes very difficult for them to heal the symptoms and the trauma.
Now, in a short explanation for our viewers,
yeah.
What would be post-traumatic stress?
Well, what they talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, it's written by psychologists and psychiatrists. They developed a DSM-4 diagnosis manual on all different types of disorders. When they don't heal the trauma within 30 days, the symptoms of the trauma start becoming symptoms in their daily lifestyle. For example, it has an impact on their education, employment, their relationship. So the symptoms that came up from the trauma will start impacting their daily lifestyle. And if they don't heal it within roughly 30 days, then the psychiatrist diagnose it as post-traumatic stress disorder. There's acute stress if you heal it within that 30-day period, but what's happening is in a lot of First Nations communities, they don't have the support, the people trained in trauma recovery. So then that turns into post-traumatic stress disorder after 30 days, and if they don't heal it within a certain time period, then it becomes chronic stress. So we have a lot of people in the First Nations community suffering from chronic stress from their traumatic events.
Now, you were just up in Red Rock,
yep,
doing a session and a workshop. What was it like, Denise?
I really enjoyed doing the workbooks. It gave me he presented us with a simple formula that relates to your mind, that connects your mind to your body, where we talk about trauma, visualize it. I guess it was the imprint of the trauma, how it imprints into your body. From that, you were able to and how you react with it, through your feelings, and how it shows in stress. And we were understanding the difference between what we might be doing for just self-care and coping, but he actually showed the difference between self-care and how to actually work this so that you can actually heal from trauma, and multiple trauma, where it feels realistic, it feels doable, it feels within reach, especially when we realize that we as First Nations, all of us have been impacted by trauma, not just the post-traumatic, but as he said, that we're well into the acute stages of trauma.
So, working that forward, the solutions, the solutions have to be found, because otherwise this just goes from generation to generation.
Yeah. Well, when you look at a lot of First Nations communities, the workers that they have in the communities, you can have maybe 10 community workers in there, their family support workers, community health reps, A&D counselors, but you don't have anybody for trauma counseling, in which maybe you have 70 to 90% of the people are suffering from trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. So, and then you end up having a mental health worker who comes in the community maybe 1 week, 1 day a week, or 1 day a month to help that community where there's a high rate of PTSD. So what I talk about, it's really important to educate all those workers in the community to understand what trauma and PTSD is, as well as give them the healing tools so they can work with the community workers, not just, rather than have somebody come in 1 hour a week, you got all the support right in the community. And that's what we need to do, and that's what I say. A lot of these community workers, they don't have that university degree to understand the academia of trauma. So it's really important to bring it down to a layman's terms where you can educate them in a more understandable way. And that's what I've done, is spent 14 years researching about trauma and PTSD to put it in a layman's terms where people can understand it more easily and be able to share it with others, for others to understand. And that's where I've developed these books that I talk about. For people to heal, I think it's really important that they understand what trauma and PTSD is in an understandable language, but also give them the healing tools. And that's my workshops are about, is the theory and practical. And when you give them the theory and practical tools right at the beginning, then it becomes more easier and effective for them to heal from the trauma. But if you're not giving them that understanding, then it becomes very difficult for them to make that healing process happen.
So ladies, what kind of reaction did you find from the workshop? Is it easy for people, or is it kind of hard to get people working towards solutions? Maybe Naomi?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in there if you don't mind. I just recently started a position with the Red Rock Indian Band, and the job posting that I'm involved with right now is focused on mental health services for our members. And the reality is, at the end of the day, there are still youth that are actively and successfully committing suicide. Some which my immediate family know personally and have been handed notes left behind. So that's all the more reason why I took my role with my position just one more step further, contacting different groups outside of our local norm, which agencies are involved with. Therefore, getting a hold of Gerald and having this workshop, the different tools that he had brought forward to us was very mixed. There was a lot of mixed reactions. A couple times he felt like he had to defend himself because he was proposing some suggestions and modules, but at the same time was very much stirring up the pot, because it was now forcing you to face some realities which do take place on a day-to-day basis. And the more that you keep pushing to have these matters addressed locally, the more you increase the chance where you might be able to reach out to that youth that has been impacted, that is bottling up their feelings, and such as with the family that was impacted just this year with this 18-year-old. So I think it's important to say while on camera here is that Gerald, although the service providers are doing everything and anything that they can, to be there for the kids, to be there for the community members, to have their job and have their paycheck, is these social issues still take place. But Gerald, one of the suggestions they had brought forward to us when it comes to unresolved mourning and trauma is simply having actual practical exercises where you can get rid of that energy. Mm-hmm. So Gerald, I'll let you take over from here, some of your suggestions that you have in your...
Well, that's the thing about it. It is really important to educate the community workers as well as the community members. If you got a community that's suffering 90% suffering from trauma and PTSD, and nothing's moving forward in regards to healing, we're getting people working in the area, alcohol, drug addictions, homelessness, but we always got to get to the core to solve the problem. And that's why I say our communities need to, Health Canada as well as First Nations communities, they need to develop a strategy in creating awareness and education around trauma and PTSD. And making more available healing opportunities for the community. So getting to the core of the problem is really important in how to make a community make that change to move forward. Because right now, we got the highest rate of Aboriginal children in foster care. We got a high rate of Aboriginal people in the justice system. We have problems with children graduating. After the residential school has closed, where you think things would change, would be getting better, but in reality they're getting worse. So what we got to look at, if this system isn't working today, we got to start looking outside the box and start looking at something different, and how to have these communities heal and get out of the residential school impact, because we're still dealing with that. And I just traveled across Western and Central Canada doing a workshop on PTSD and Aboriginal children in foster care, because that's a serious issue right now. We have children, more children going into foster care, and today the generations today are suffering from the residential school impact. If we can develop this strategy, we won't see the children ending up in care. The young children, young adults ending up in the jail system. We shouldn't be building more jails. We should be building PTSD treatment centers and getting to the core of the problem. That's what I see as really important.
One of the issues you see often with youth today, when I was a kid, I'd come home from school, wanted to dump my school books as fast as possible, and we were out playing either road hockey or running around or doing things. Today, a lot of kids get home from school and it's right to the TV, right to the video screens.
Yeah.
Is that part of the problem?
Well, when we look at the residential school, one of the problems was the parenting skills. The teachings that they got from the residential school staff was a negative impact on them. So when they came out the residential school, they didn't have those parental teachings. All they had was verbal abuse and physical abuse from the staff. So that carried on from generations, and that's where we're seeing the impact. It wasn't just the verbal, physical, sexual abuse in the residential school, but it was the damage of the parenting skills that was fractured. So today we don't, the intergenerational impact isn't just the traumas that carrying on, but the damage of the parenting skills. And that's one area, and that's why I always talk about in my workshop the importance of developing positive parenting, going back to some of the teachings: love, care, respect, nurture, guidance, discipline, trust and safety. Those things are important. But also we need role models in First Nations communities. We need to take them out and play street hockey. We need to take them out and play soccer. We need to take them, if we can't do the activities with them, we at least need to make sure they get there safe and get home safe. But we need role models to get out and be part of, to be active, to have the kids active. Otherwise they're just sitting in the homes and playing games, electronic games all day. So I go to some communities, First Nations communities, there's little or no activity in the community. There's no kids out there doing any activities, and they need role models to get them out there, get them outside of the house, burn that energy off. And when they do that, then they come back and they're tired and they go to sleep. And the other thing I talk about is structures. Get structures in place where they get up in the morning, get ready for school, brush their teeth. Evenings they go to bed at a certain time, where they're not staying up from 7 till 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. So structures is really important in regards to the impact of the residential school. So positive parenting is really important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You sound like you had something to add.
Well, no, I'm just. We have a lot of programming at Lake Helen with the programming staff, working with kids, getting them, and we do have programs getting them outside and being active as an alternative to the e-games or whatever, and programming that isn't just sports, but also blending more into our traditional lifestyle as well, making sure that we're active in our food gathering, so our cultural activities. So those things are important.
Yeah, and the other thing I see is traditions and cultures. You know, the healing components around traditions, around smudging, sweat lodges. So we need to incorporate that back into First Nations to make sure that they are able to utilize their traditions around healing practices is really important. I mean, those are the impacts of the residential school, the lack of parenting skills, the disconnection from their culture and tradition, you know, doing the burning ceremonies, the smudging, the traditional prayers are really important.
Gerald, how was it that you said that if it's affecting your present?
Yeah, well, that's what I say is, you know, when we look at trauma, you know, if you have unresolved trauma, it has an impact on the present way. It's always there, you know, the trauma will always be there until you resolve it. So, you know, if you have childhood trauma and you haven't dealt with it, it'll carry on into your youth and adult life. And that's why I always say for healing, you have to go back there. You have to look at what came up in that traumatic event and find some healing strategies to reduce the pain. And then you're able to move on in your life without it impacting you in your daily life.
So naturally, there were a few of us that, you know, kind of sitting with answering our parents because
And
it
it's
was
never
kind of
too
hitting the
late.
core for us.
And it's never too late, because you mentioned something that there was a 90-year-old woman
Yeah.
who contacts you, and so
Yeah.
it's never too late.
Yeah, so, you know, it's really important is to really address the trauma, to deal with the unresolved pain, and then you'll be able to move forward, and it shouldn't bother you in your future lifestyle.
And just by simply doing just some basic exercises,
Yeah.
by taking an energy into a rock, and then what?
Releasing it.
Yeah, and letting the
Like
energy go.
cleansing, yeah.
Yeah.
Just taking that out, everything, and then like everything that normally, like if you're going to be freaking out about something, which I know I'll be the first to admit I've done that on more than one occasion. So I took everything, you know, to heart that Gerald was talking about over the last 2 days, and he said just take that energy, put it in a rock, and then just throw it in a water. Just let it go.
Will be collecting stones.
Then that way, like you're physically doing it too,
Yeah.
and then you're getting rid of that energy and you're giving it back to the earth.
Well, that's what I talk about when we talk about, we rely on too much of the one-to-one counseling, you know, but in reality, there's so much exercise outside with the land, sea, sky, fire, and water, like burning ceremonies, as well as going and do a dipping in the water to cleanse and let go of that negative energy. Those things are really important that we need to use. This sweat lodge, you know, that's outside. We go do a cleansing and letting go and replenishing our mind, body, and spirit.
So the real message is that no matter what has happened,
Yeah.
there's hope.
Yes.
Yeah, there's always, what I always say, as long as you're breathing, there's still hope. You know, you know, as long as you're, one thing I talk about healing trauma, there's two things is you got to be willingness to use those exercises to make a change, and you got to commit to constantly using them. So that's how you get rid of the negative energy. Once you get rid of that, then you'll be able to live more of a positive lifestyle. But I see that's the biggest problem, not just in the First Nations community, but in society in general, is we have a lack of awareness of what trauma and PTSD is. And that's where we need to break that, cycle of lack of understanding, because the more we can understand, if we can understand it before we experience trauma, when that trauma happens, we'll be able to move forward, have the tools to deal with it, and then to move on instead of it carrying on, 10, 20, 30 years into their lifestyle. And that's one thing that's lacking in regards to children in foster care. When a children gets put into foster care and taken away from their trauma, that's automatically trauma for them. So, when the ministry and social services should be providing trauma counseling for that child, and I don't know how much that's happening in the process. And we end up having so many children running away from foster care homes because they have those trauma symptoms in their body, where they're moving into the flight mode, where they just want to constantly run and run and run. And that's exactly what happened in Manitoba from that young girl who was found murdered. She was running from home to home to home, and nobody gave her the skills on how to deal with the trauma she was experiencing. What I always say is education and awareness around trauma PTSD will make a big difference in the community if you have service providers who have that knowledge and awareness, and as well as the community members.
So for people who want to find out more,
Yeah.
where do they go?
Well, even for connecting with me, I have my website, restoringbalanceconsulting.com, or you can email restoringbalanceconsulting@hotmail.com, and then these books are available on my website as well. And I do contract work where I go into communities, educate community members, as well as do healing workshops for former residential school students, adults, and youth.
I'm James. We're in the Net News Ledger newsroom. I'm here with Denise, Gerald, and Naomi. And thank you for tuning in.